Alright, this is my method 6 final practical submission. This is my patient Donnie, I'm John. We're going to start off with the left rotation restricted occiput. So to palpate for that statically, we're going to go in between C1 and the ramus of the jaw, see if one side is open more than the other. The side that it would open would be the side that it would be rotated. We can also block C1 and rotate the occiput. So Donnie's actually restricted more going into right rotation, however the adjustment is for left rotation restriction. So I'm going to find his mastoid, taking my MCP contact, taking it in different hand too, making it a rat hole, laterally flexing over, rotating, stepping around, and then my thrust would be P to A. Alright, so the next adjustment is going to be the supine TMJ long axis distraction. So I'm going to, are you okay if I touch your face?
Yep.
Finding the temporomandibular joint and have my patient open and close his mouth nice and slow. Good. And so if there's a restriction on the right, I'm going to rotate my patient's head, take a piezoform contact. I'm going to distract in a long axis distraction along the angle of the jaw, and then at end range I'm going to impulse LAD, which would be mostly an I to S and P to A vector. Alright, next is the T6 for rotation and lateral flexion. Are you okay if I undo your gown the rest of the way?
Yep.
Good. I want to be cross your arms in front of you. Checking rotation of the thoracic spine. Going to rotate, and we are going to push on the transverse processes. Same thing on the other side. He actually has a lot more left rotation, and then we are going to do lateral flexion here and pushing the spinous across. Good. Then I'll get you lay prone or on your stomach. So the adjustment we're given is right rotation restriction, right lateral flexion restriction. So we want to be on the patient's left side. We would find T6 by going from the spine of the scap, coming to the midline, placing our hand kind of like this with our knuckles out, and we are going to torque, have our patient breathe in and out while we're doing this torque, and then we would impulse P to A with torque, the same way we pre-stressed. Alright, the next adjustment we're doing is the glenohumeral joint for an internal rotation restriction. Palpate for that, we're going to put our patient in scaption, and we are going to check their internal rotation and their external rotation. We want 150 degrees of range of motion in in a pain-free arc. And then we are going to, so he has an internal rotation restriction. Bring this up, and we get it as close to the humeral head as I can. I'm going to pre-stress internal rotation, distract out, and then I would bunny hop in a LED fashion. Alright, next is the seated right radial head for a P-A restriction and pronation. So to palpate for P-A restrictions, I'm going to take the patient's arm, find the posterior aspect of the radial head, and I'm going to supinate and pronate while applying a little bit of joint play on it. So he has a pronation restriction. So I'm going to bring his arm behind him. I'm going to fully pronate, and then I would thrust P to A with my thumb. Alright, next is the seated proximal carpal row flexion restriction on the right. So we're going to find the proximal carpal row, block it, and we are going to check how it flexes and extends. So he has a flexion restriction. So we would be here, we would put him into flexion, we would distract out, and then we would long axis distract it to set the adjustment. Next we have the seated to supine TL extension restriction adjustment. So we're going to palpate for an extension restriction by controlling the patient's shoulders, pushing into extension, and then joint playing. Alright, I'll have you turn so your feet are here. I'm going to place a marker in between my hands just to protect my knuckles because I'm going to need more than a flat hand for this. This can be done ipsilaterally or contralaterally. I'm going to do cross your arms like this on me. I'm going to do it ipsilaterally. Place my hand on the TL and I'm going to breathe in, breathe out, and we're going to lay back. And then I would drop. Just from the pre-stress there, you got some good extension. All right, the next is the supine internal rotation restriction wax on, off in a tug of war position. So I'm going to take my patient's leg, that. I'm going to bring him into the tug of war position, distract out, come up in 45, come out a little bit, and then I would LAD it. Alright, the next is the prone Pete A fibular head. I'm going to start by palpating the fibular head. I'm going to reach behind with my digits and spring for Enfield P to A. Then I would check A to P by pushing on the front of it, kind of with my thenar thumb. Then I would have my patient flip over on his stomach. I'm going to lift this leg, taking a piezoform knife edge contact here, reinforcing my other hand, keeping my head to the outside to avoid a boundary crossing. I'm going to take him to Enfield, lift up, distract out, and then it would be a LAD thrust. Using my whole body. All right, next is the right first metacarpal, checking all the restrictions, and we would just adjust. We do a test plus impulse adjustment. So we are going to distract out, we are going to corkscrew, we are going to bring into extension, bring into flexion, and then medial and lateral. And if we found a restriction, which I do not, then we would test plus impulse by taking to end range and LADing it.